Hi, everybody, and welcome to week one of Accounting 103. This is payroll accounting, and I'm Jeannie Goodwin, and I'm your instructor for this course. And I'm excited to be teaching this course. I think this is a great opportunity for you to learn some skills, not only for your profession as a bookkeeper or accountant, but also to help you look at your paycheck a little differently. And we all could use help understanding what goes on with our paycheck and making sure that we're getting paid what we're supposed to be getting paid. So these are skills that will help you not only in your personal but your professional life as well. So I'm excited to be teaching this class. I really enjoy the payroll aspect of things, and um, I've done a lot of payroll work in my life, so hopefully I can share some of those experiences with you as we go through the course. So let's go ahead and get started. Um, Today, being the first day, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. We're going to go through how to contact me, and we're going to talk about discussions about the late policy, and then a little bit how to navigate through the course. So just a little bit about me. Um, that's me. And I've been teaching here at Independence University for over 4 years now. I am a CPA and a CFE and the Certified Public Accountant and also a Certified Fraud Examiner are those designations. And I've worked in both of those type of industries. I'll tell you a little bit about that here in a second. I received my Bachelor's of Science degree in accounting from Indiana University South Bend way back in 1994. And then I received my master's degree from Texas A&M in 2010, and that was a business administration. So it's an MBA program that I took from Texas A&M. So I have on here that I've worked in lots of different industries and positions, and I've worked. The neat part about accounting is it allows you to do different things. So I've done a lot of different things in my career. I started out as a bookkeeper and really enjoyed that type of work, but um, I did that while I was in school and I was just starting out. And then I got my degree and I started to work at some smaller companies. And then I went to work for, I was an accountant at some smaller companies. I went to work for Aetna as an auditor and was a great opportunity. So it was an insurance company that I worked at, their audit, Aetna. I'm sure a lot of you know that. So I got to travel all over and do some auditing. And then I went to work for Deloitte for a while, and that's where I got my uh, public accounting experience. I stayed with them for several years. Um, Prior to all of that, I guess, I'll start back with my fraud experience. I worked at an amusement park in internal theft and fraud. So it's where I really got my taste of fraud investigation and really enjoyed doing that. So I decided to pursue that a little bit more with my career. So that's why I went with my CFE there and really going through a lot of fraud classes to understand things a little bit better and uh, to be able to get my designation as a CFE. So when I went to work for Deloitte, I did a lot of fraud investigation work there and also a lot of internal control reviews and really worked on the internal side. We did some outsourcing for internal audit and things like that. So that was kind of the internal side of things. I did work in the public side of things for a little bit there, but we were focused more on the consulting side of things when I worked for Deloitte. And then I went to work for a manufacturing company as a finance manager, and I was there for a lot of years. It was a aerospace company that manufactured parts for lots of different types of uh, air equipment, I guess. It was not just the planes and the helicopters and things like that. We did a lot of different types of pieces for that, and I really, really enjoyed working for the manufacturing side of things. And this was my first responsibility for payroll as a supervisor was with it was TA Manufacturing is what I worked for there. And that was a great opportunity there. I really enjoyed that job. I really enjoyed working in manufacturing and going down and seeing how the products are made and putting your hands on what makes our company our company. So I really enjoyed that. I took a little time off to have some kids, and then I went back to work as an accountant for a school district. So I did a little nonprofit accounting. And then I went to work at a construction company where I stayed for several years as a controller. So um, responsibility for payroll and throughout my later part of my career. So I worked at the school district and at my controllership, I was in charge of payroll there too. So I've had lots of experience with payroll and different types. I mean, we worked in nonprofit organizations, so it's a little bit different there. And then public accounting, we did a little bit of our reviews with payroll to make sure the controls are set up. So from the fraud standpoint, of course, payroll is always a hot topic. So I did a lot of work with that as well. So hopefully, as we go through the course and as we go through my lectures, I'll be able to share some of that experience with you, and uh, you can understand a little bit more of, not only the academic side, but also the real world side and what goes on in the real world. So there's, oh, one more thing about me I always like to tell everybody. From my experience in school, I've been on both sides of the screen. I did a lot of alternative type of schooling when I was in school, and I liked the opportunity to work on my own and at my own pace. So I started out taking, when they had, you you guys probably don't remember, but they used to have classes on TV where you could take your teacher would do a lecture on TV, and then you do your homework and you would send your homework into your teacher and things like that. And when the online classes started to become popular, my master's program was online, and through Texas A&M, they had a great program that allowed you to take the actual courses with the same teachers with the same assignments and everything that was done on ground through an online version of their class. So it was a perfect setup for me. I had uh, 3 little kids at the time, so I was not able to commit to an on ground program where I would be gone for periods of time. So online was a perfect opportunity for me. So I did take my master's program online. So I was an online student for a long time and now an online teacher. So I've been on both sides of this, and I understand where you're coming from as an online student. So I'm able to share some of those experience with you and hopefully bring in things that I liked about my classes that I took when I was an online student and leave out the stuff that I didn't like. So hopefully I've weeded out some of those things. One of the things that's important to me is to make sure that you guys are able to contact me. There's several ways to get a hold of me. One is these live sessions that we have once a week, and we'll have them on Tuesdays. And then I also have Q&A time. So it's basically open office hours that I'll have on Wednesdays. So you're welcome to join me at any of those times, but please don't feel like you have to be here for those live sessions. I do um, these live sessions and Q&A time only for these specific times during the week, but you're welcome to contact me outside of these live sessions through email or phone or text or whatever you're comfortable with. So um, those are some great ways to get a hold of me, and you're welcome to contact me at any point. I prefer you contact me through email. It's a better way for me to keep track of the messages, and there's times where I am not able to get on the phone, but I might be able to send you a quick email back and answer your question or get right back to you with what your concern is. So I prefer email. So please try to email me just so I can keep track of the messages that come and go. And if you're not comfortable with email or you'd rather call me, of course, you're welcome to call me at any time. My number's in the syllabus, and I also text on that line, so you're welcome to send me a text if that's how you communicate best. Um, I'm here to answer questions for you, so that's any of those methods to get to me is how you need to get to me. And please, if you don't hear from me within 24 hours, try a different method of getting hold of me because somehow I didn't get the message. I will always get back to you within 24 hours for sure. My goal is a lot less than 24 hours, but if you don't hear from me within 24 hours, somehow the message did not get to me. So please make sure that you contact me a different way, and don't feel funny about doing that. I'm asking you to do that. So if you don't hear from me, send me another message and let me know that you did contact me so we can figure out what happened with that original message, because it's important for me that I get back to you with the information that you need to be successful in the class. So I don't want you to get frustrated waiting around for an answer. And I mean, granted, there's going to be times where I can't get right back to you because I do have a life outside of this. So it does happen where I'm doing other things and I can't get back to you, but I try my best. So I make sure that I know that you're trying to get a hold of me so we can get your question resolved. In bookkeeping and in accounting, it is extremely important that you're meeting deadlines. And you know from what you've been through already in school that there are lots of different ways for accountants to report their information, and regulators, the government, to the industry, to their creditors, and there's the list goes on and on about where this information goes that we're preparing as accountants. And most of that information requires us to have a deadline to submit that information. And in this financial world, if you miss those deadlines, it not only costs your company money, but it also costs your company some reputation as well. Companies don't always want to work with other companies that don't meet deadlines because it's frustrating. It's they need to use their resources to follow up and to hound the company to make sure that they're getting the information that they need. And eventually, they won't necessarily want to work with that company because they don't like spending the extra resources. So it is extremely important that you start having a good habit of meeting your deadlines. And in school is a great place to start. So I expect you to have your homework completed by Saturday at midnight. You have a perfect opportunity to go through the syllabus, to go through the course, and see what's expected of you and when your assignments are due. So I expect you to have your assignments in on time. However, I do understand sometimes things happen, um, and you can't get your homework in. One way to avoid this, and I always tell my students this, is start early in the week. It's great for you to start early on and try to get that work done so there's no question about what's going on. Um, so it's important to try to make sure that you're meeting those deadlines. I do allow uh, I do allow late work up to 1 week past the due date. Homework and assessments have a 10% penalty, and discussions have a 20% penalty because it's important for you to be in the discussion when the discussion is going on. The whole idea is for a collaborative effort between you and your classmates and have a good discussion. So um, if you miss those discussions, there's a 20% penalty on those discussion posts. So let's talk a little bit about discussions. Each week, well, for weeks 1, 2, and 3, we are going to have a discussion. Uh, the discussion responses that are expected from you is one is your primary post. And your primary post is the response to the discussion post for this week, for the question. And there could be multiple parts of the question, so make sure that you're answering all parts of the question in your primary post. This primary post needs to be submitted by Wednesday at midnight. It needs to be at least 150 words and have at least one APA formatted reference. We'll talk about APA in just a second. Then there's a secondary post, and your secondary post can be any time that you reply either to a classmate or to me, or even if you want to put a secondary post in the discussion. So anytime you're completing a second post is considered your secondary post. So there needs to be at least 2 of those secondary posts done by Saturday. They need to be meaningful responses. I'm not looking for you to say, great post, I agree with what you said, good job, keep up the good work, that kind of stuff. It's great for you to have some communication back and forth with your classmates. Um, you learn a lot from your classmates. And one of my favorite things when I was in school was the discussion board because of that. Everybody brings a different perspective to the discussion, so you get a lot of different feedback. And you can learn a lot that way. Okay, between your 3 posts, or between the primary and secondary posts, you need to have at least 3 posts. You can have more than that. This is the minimum requirement. So this is what I'm asking you to do for the minimum. You need to have at least 3 posts. You need to participate on at least 2 different days, and your references need to be in APA format. If you have trouble with APA format, I've included a link here to Purdue's Online Writing Lab, their OWL program. They've got some great references to help you with your APA formatting. So take a look at that if you have trouble with APA formatting. But I do grade the APA, so please make sure your references are in APA format. Okay, before we get started in the material, I do want to take just a second and go through the course. I'll just point out a couple things. Of course, you know where your discussions are, assignments and assessments, and each week we've added a live lecture quiz as well. The live lecture quiz, just make sure that you're listening to the lecture every week, whether it's live or through the recording, and to make sure that you're picking up what is being said during the lecture. So please take a look at that live lecture quiz and make sure you're completing that as well. I always want to point out where the textbook is, because this seems to be one of the problems that people have the most. So on the left-hand side here, if you click down to modules, and then when you get into modules, some of this is going to be a little bit different than what you see. But if you scroll down here to where there's a little link on the side, not a document, a link, and it says Vital Source ebook, if you click on that Vital Source ebook, you're going to open a new screen that says load this book in a new window. So if you click on that, that's going to bring up your textbook for this week. Okay, so please make sure that every week you're going through this textbook. My lectures are going to highlight some of the items from the text, but they are not going to cover everything that's in this text that is what's expected of you. So please make sure that you're going back and reading through the text. And your text has some great examples of things that you're going to need to do for your homework or to help you better understand the material for the week. So go back through and take a look at that. So this is an important part. But another thing that I really wanted to point out that we need to know for this course is under the e-course textbook, the ebook, is the chapter 4 for this. For some reason, chapter 4 got left out of the ebook that's there. So when we get to chapter 4, I think it's in week 3 that we're working on chapter 4. So you're going to need this extra chapter here when you do that. Okay, that's really what I wanted to point out. I think you guys understand how the course works, and if you have questions about that, you're more than welcome to contact me with those questions. Okay, so let's talk about the material here. I'm going to go over the material, and then we're going to talk about some examples of what your homework is going to look like for this week. So let's get started here. The payroll profession. Let's talk about the payroll profession. There are all kinds of positions within the payroll profession that you can get. There's anything from a payroll clerk to a senior payroll manager. The average salary for starting is about $33,000, but the job responsibilities for payroll are constantly increasing, and a lot of companies are combining the responsibilities of payroll with other things. So it's good to have a rounded background so you can demonstrate your experience in different things. And if you want to stay in payroll, there's lots of different opportunities that you can do within that you can have within this profession. It's important in payroll that you stay current. So if you're not one of those people that if you're not one of those people that like continuing education, this may not be the place for you. So it is important because payroll, the laws and regulations are constantly changing. So it's important for you to stay current with your membership in a payroll organization. So you're constantly getting fed the new regulations that are out there. Or you can, even without joining an organization, you can subscribe to some feeds that are out there. Some organizations have feeds that you can subscribe to that you'll get the updated information so you know when new regulations are coming out and when changes are happening. So you'll know those right off the bat. The Code of Ethics sets a direction for the profession. American Payroll Association has a code of ethics for all payroll professionals. And of course, working in that profession, that's something that all payroll people should follow. So it's good to take a look at that. So let's look at the laws that are out there. The biggest law or the largest law that payroll follows is the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act really covers a lot of what the payroll department handles. They cover minimum wage laws. They cover coverage of employees engaged in interstate commerce or production of goods and services for interstate commerce. And they talk about the maintaining of records for both the employer and the employee to make sure that um, everybody's being paid correctly, um, that the documentation is there in case there's any questions that come up, anything like that. So the Fair Labor Standards Act is something that's really a, a wide-reaching regulation that in payroll you are going to be very familiar with because these are really a lot of the regulations that you follow uh, are all during this this act that's out there. So you will get to know it very well. There's also the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, which is FICA. Everybody's familiar with FICA. FICA is a tax on employees and employers to fund the Federal Old Age and Survivors Trust Fund and the Federal Disability Insurance Trust Fund. There's two pieces of it. And we make payments to people that are entitled, the makes payments to people that are entitled to Social Security benefits. So this is the automatic payment or automatic deduction that comes from your check. And also there's an employer portion of this as well that combine together that your employer makes the deposit for you to this group. So um, this is how it's all set up, I guess. So this is the funding for Social Security, and then FICA also is responsible for the distribution of it. There's also income tax and withholding laws. The federal income tax employs a percentage formula used by each employer to withhold a specified amount from each wage payment to the employer. And then same thing with the state withholding, and the rates are different from state to state. And you'll know when you hire onto a company, you fill out a W-4 that explains how you want to complete or how you want your withholding to go and how much you want taken from your taxes or taken for your taxes at the end of the year. And basically you're just telling your employer that you want a certain amount to be put into this fund for you each time your paycheck comes out. So then at the end of the year, when you do your taxes, you just reconcile that amount from what is in your bucket that you've saved up for the year and what you owe the government for taxes. And then any difference between that is your refund or the amount you owe at the end of the year. So that's how that works. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with how that comes out on your check as well. Unemployment Tax Act is another one we look at. Taxes are levied on employers as the Federal Unemployment Tax Act, or FUTA. You might have heard of that. And that's used to pay the state and federal administrative expenses for the unemployment program. And then there are also state unemployment taxes, which are SUTA, which are employer taxes that are imposed by all states. These are taxes used to pay the unemployment benefits for the state. And this is something that you will not see on your check, but you will deal with as a payroll accountant because these are employer taxes that are levied. So there are a lot of regulations that go into the FUTA and SUTA. Uh, so these are combined as employer only tax. So luckily, this is something we don't have to pay. We don't have to pay on our taxes. Then we have fair employment laws, which are some of that is embodied in the Fair Labor Standards Act, and some of that is uh, are federal regulations that are out there. And many of these laws deal with discrimination for on the basis of age, race, color, religion, gender, national origin. All of those regulations that you have as far as equal pay and things like that will come from the fair employment laws. And there are a lot of them out there. If you start really getting into, you'll read a lot about them in your textbook, but if you really start getting into what's out there as far as regulations, it can get really complicated. So taking the payroll classes are really an important part of this to get started, so you understand what sources you need to look at and where the laws are coming from, because there are a lot of them out there and a lot of regulatory agencies that are making those laws. So it's important that you take a look at those and really know where the laws are coming from. There's also state laws that are out there. Um, there are definitely some equal pay type state laws. Most of that is federal, but you're going to see for state laws, you're going to see workers' compensation, which protects the workers against losses due to work related injuries, and then the state disability benefits, which require some states require employers to fund disability benefits. Not all states do that. If you have an SDI deduction on your check, that's you are in a state that has disability benefits, which is nice in a way if you need your disability, which you've put in all along. The states that don't have disability insurance, you're on your own for some of that. And a lot of healthcare providers or a lot of health group programs offer disability insurance where you can contribute this on your own and have a payout for that as well. But some states will do it through your check and through the state funding program. So I've lived in both states. I've lived in states that have this disability part and states that haven't. So it really it's the states that haven't, it's just up to you to get your own disability insurance if that's something that you're interested in. If you work in payroll, you're going to deal with FMLA, which is the Family and Medical Leave Act. This guarantees employees up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave each year without the threat of job loss. So if someone has a situation that is going to keep them away from work for a significant period of time, they are covered under FMLA for 12 weeks. So they are able to take 12 weeks off. It is not paid time. A lot of employers will allow companies or allow employees to take their vacation or some paid time for this, but it is not guaranteed paid time. So if you have vacation, you might be able to fill some of the time that you're on leave with vacation time or sick time, however the company lets you handle it. But it protects your job for up to 12 weeks. So you can return to work after that period of time. And there are a lot of qualifying aspects of FMLA, but there's a lot of detail involved in that you can read about as well. The human resource system, a lot of times payroll is included in human resources. A lot of times it's in accounting. A lot of times it shares. So the human resource system embodies all the procedures and methods relating to recruiting, selecting, orienting, training, and terminating personnel. And you can see this is just a hiring process that the HR department will go through. And always, even if payroll is not in the HR department, payroll is always working hand in hand with HR. And you can see why, of course, because there is information that is critical to the payroll process that is accumulated by the HR department. So it's important that you work hand in hand with the HR department to make sure that the information is flowing correctly and timely so the payroll is as accurate as you can make it. But here's an example of the workflow. Receive the request for the new employee, examine applications, interview applicants, administer tests that may be necessary for this job, check the references, and then select and notify the successful applicant. And then prepare the personnel file and send the information to the payroll department. Seems very simple, which, it's really not that simple, but it looks that simple. The human resource record keeping, on the record keeping side, you provide data for considering promotions and changes in the status of earnings of workers. Provide information required by federal, state, and local laws. Justify company actions if investigated by national or state labor relations boards, and justify company's actions in discussions with unions. So there's a lot of responsibility, definitely, in the HR department to make sure that the background information is there, the policies and procedures are there, and that the company is doing what they're supposed to be doing according to the laws and the regulations that are set out. So it's a big job for sure. So here is the payroll accounting system. The payroll accounting system embodies all the procedures and methods relating to the disbursement of pay to employees. So that's really the focus. So payroll records hours, computes the pay, deductions, and net pay, and they complete the payroll register. They maintain deductions, they update employees' earnings records, they prepare paychecks, they record payroll in the accounting books, and then other payroll reports that are necessary. So there's a lot of information that goes on here, and this is really the actual calculation of the payroll. So it's critical that the payroll department has the most up-to-date and accurate information so they're able to produce payroll checks that are accurate for the employees. So I mentioned in that diagram there the payroll register. The payroll register is probably the tool that you're going to use the most in the payroll function as far as preparing it, but also for information later on to look back at. The payroll register is a multi-column form that's used to assemble and summarize the data needed for the end of each payroll period. It's a detailed listing of the company's complete payroll for that particular period, and that's why it's a good resource for you. It lists all the employees who earned wages, the amount of the wages, their deductions, and the net amount paid. So you can see that this is kind of a snapshot of everything that you do for the weekly payroll or biweekly, however you're running payroll. But for each payroll period, it's a snapshot of what happened. You can see it kind of all in one place. And this register is used to prepare your journal entries for the accounting side of payroll as well. The information provided in the payroll register is used primarily to meet the requirements of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And you're going to hear that term a lot in this class, but that payroll register really makes sure that the wages are paid correctly, the deductions are being done correctly, the numbers are calculated correctly, the right number of employees are included, people without payroll are not included, and there's a lot of things that you can see from that payroll register. So it's something that you're going to see quite often. The next record that you're going to see a lot is the employee's earnings record. After the information has been recorded in the payroll register, the information for each employee is transferred or posted to the company's earnings record. So if you think about it from an accounting standpoint, this is like taking the broad information that we have, like let's say on an accounts receivable in the accounts receivable in the GL. And then we're going to take it and put it into the subsidiary ledgers, which is basically what we're doing here. Each employee is kind of a subsidiary ledger of the payroll register. So after the payroll register is completed, then each line of the register has an employee listed, and we take that and put that into each employee's earnings record. And the earnings record provides information that's needed to prepare periodic reports required by the withholding tax laws, FICA tax laws, state unemployment disability laws, and it's also used to record the information so you can prepare your W-2s at the end of the year, which is the wage and tax statement. So everybody's knows what W-2s are. It's all the uh, information for the whole year that you use to file your taxes. So um, the employee's earning records are another important piece of the puzzle because this gives you the detail by employee. So if an employee has a question about something, you can see the employee's information in the tax statement, the register. But if you come back to the earnings record, you can see multiple pay periods for that same employee. You can see the totals for that employee, and it's just really on the detailed side. So kind of how you look at it, the register is really from a company standpoint because everything's included in one spot. So if your manager asks you what the payroll is for a period of time, you can see that total payroll without having to go to each individual employee's records. Um, and you can get it all in one place there on the register. But if an employee has a question, you have the employee's earnings records that you can go back and get the detail for that employee specifically. So both of these are important to your process when you're doing payroll, especially if you need to go back to refer to something, and also, of course, to prepare your tax returns. A lot of companies choose to outsource their payroll. Um, the company I worked for thought it was important to outsource some of the payroll um, because they wanted to pass the liability on. And that is one of the reasons why people choose to do that. It is there are companies out there, excuse me, there are companies out there that train their employees specifically for the payroll duties, and that's all they do. That's their whole responsibility is processing payroll. Those companies are always up to date with the latest regulations and laws that are out there. So sometimes it's better for the companies to ensure that they are doing the most accurate, timely payroll by outsourcing it to someone else. It can be less expensive in some cases. It really just depends on the organization itself. So you have to really look at both sides of things. Some cases it increases your quality, improves efficiency and quicker release time, transfers some liability. And I just note here that 50% of the mid-market employers outsource their payroll. They feel that it's the best option for them. So really it's something you have to look at on a case by case basis to make sure that it is what is in the best interest of your company. So it really just depends. The things that I've seen, we did outsource for a little bit and brought it back in house. Uh, the one thing I didn't like about outsourcing is I had to refer employees to another company if employees had questions about things. I didn't like what was set up. A lot of times that was pushed off to the payroll company. And I didn't like having employees come and ask questions and I just would pass the buck to somebody else, basically. I like to be able to answer the questions when they had them. And it was difficult because I didn't have the information or I couldn't do what they needed to have done because it was something that had to be done at the payroll company itself. So I liked better when I had the information there that I was able to provide to the employees if they had questions. So that's one thing to consider as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Fair Labor Standards Act. I said we're going to talk uh, the whole course about Fair Labor Standards Act, but let's just give a quick overview here. The enterprise, and there are two sides to it, enterprise side and the employee side. So the employer side and the employee side. So on the employer side, we'll cover an organization if it has gross sales of $500,000 or more. Two employees engaged in business activity. So it doesn't apply to mom and pop type organizations, although a lot of mom and pop organizations will follow the Fair Labor Standards Act because it's basically a best practice type thing as well. So on the individual side, if a business does not meet the enterprise criteria, employees are still protected under Fair Labor Standards Act, and that's why a lot of them will still follow that rule. They must be acting in commerce. They must be in business to be able to be covered with that. So an employer is defined as a person acting directly or indirectly in the interest of the employer. An employee performs services in covered employment. Domestics, services of a household nature that's performed. Partnership is partners are not employees. So remember that. We're going to see that in a couple different places. And statutory employees are independent contractors. So they're not really considered employees of the company. And there's a lot of criteria that go into all of these things, but this is just an overview for you. Minimum wage is set by Fair Labor Standards Act, and it's the minimum payment paid to employees, and it can include commission, bonuses, severance pay, on-call pay, shift or weekend differential. All of these things are discussed in the Fair Labor Standards Act. We talk about less than minimum wage. A training wage can be applied if it allows for minimum wage for employees less than 20 years old for their first 90 days. They can pay a training wage, which is not quite minimum wage. It doesn't happen very often, but employers are allowed to do this. Full-time students can be employed at 85% of minimum wage, and institutions of higher learning can employ their own students at 85% of minimum wage. Student employees can be paid 75% minimum wage if they're in a vocational training program. Impaired earning capacity because of age, mental or physical deficiency, or injury are exceptions to the minimum wage. And also tipped employees, but their wage that they get in the end of everything, so if their hourly wage plus their tips must still equal the minimum wage that's set forth in that state. So if what the company is paying them and their tips don't equal minimum wage, the employer must make up the difference. They have to be being paid minimum wage between the two. A work week is defined as fixed and regularly occurring periods of 168 hours, so 7 consecutive 24-hour periods. It can begin and end on any day, and they can only change it if it's a permanent change. It's not something that you can switch back and forth on. Each work week stands alone in its calculations. Even though everything is going to be added up together, everything is looked at on a individual work week. And most of the time we're talking about overtime with that. So when you're looking at the work week for overtime requires that employees be paid overtime for hours worked over 40 hours in a work week. Some states require overtime in excess of 8 hours per day. Exempt employees are not required to be paid overtime. So there are a couple ways to look at overtime, and that's what this is telling you, that you've got if you work more than 40 hours in a week, you get overtime. Some states require anything over 8 hours in a day to be paid overtime. But there are some employees that are considered exempt from overtime. This means, this is kind of really big for that. Let me go back, sorry. Let's do it this way so you can see everything. Just because you're exempt doesn't mean that you are salaried. You can be hourly exempt and you can be non-exempt salary. So exempt means that you are not paid overtime. So if you look through this schedule here, you can see where the different people are different requirements for exempt employees. So you can look through this later. I'm not going to go through each detail here, but this is a hot topic in a lot of cases. There are employers always want their employees to be exempt because they don't have to pay them overtime. So there are a lot of rules and regulations as to how employees can be paid. And this is important, that when you are setting up an employee, that it is clear what their requirements are for their job and what the expectations are for their job, so that they either fit into the exempt or non-exempt category and it's done correctly. Of course, that's the idea. So what are some other requirements that are covered? Child labor laws, the Equal Pay Act, work age requirement, and travel time. Those are just some things that are included in Fair Labor Standards Act. So you can see there's lots of detail in here, and it's pretty extensive to look through. Okay, we talk about work time. I'm going to go kind of quickly here because I want to make sure we have some time to look at some examples of your homework this week. Work time is idle time, waiting time, rest periods and breaks, meal periods, working from home, sleeping time. Believe it or not, in some cases, the time if they're required to work over a certain number of hours, sleeping time is considered work time, and training time is also work time. Things that are not required by the Fair Labor Standards Act: extra pay for work on holidays, vacation pay is not required, overtime pay in weeks with holidays or vacation, and restricted hours for somebody who's over 16 years of age. Some employers pay their employees by piece. So this is, you see in manufacturing plants a lot of times where um, people are responsible for the production of a product. So they're paid by the amount of production they have in that week. The hourly rate must still be equal to or above minimum wage. And to calculate the hourly wage, you divide the total weekly earnings from piecework by the hours worked in the week to make sure that they are getting paid minimum wage. And they are still entitled to overtime pay if they're working for more than 40 hours. On the record keeping side, employers must keep records that indicate the hours worked for each workday and each work week. You should have a timesheet, a time card, or a computerized timekeeping, web-based timekeeping, biometrics, interactive voice response, whatever it is, the company needs to make sure that they're keeping that information. IRS recommends you keep records for 4 years after the taxes are paid, but for auditing purposes, it's 7 years. So make sure that the records are stored properly so you're able to get those back out for auditing purposes. Some states have different requirements, so it's important to check to make sure that the state that you're in is you're following the rules and regulations for that state. Okay, so what I normally do during my lectures is I go through this information, just some highlights from the text, and then we go over some examples of what your homework is going to look like. So this week, I'm going to go over in your assignment, let's see, your assignment that you have for this week. Let's go into our homework assignment for the week. Please note in your homework assignment that you do have a template right here to complete your homework. So please make sure you're using that template for this. So you need to complete problems 2.3, 2.4, and 2.10a. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the B-set problems so you can take a look at what those B-set problems are. So let's go into chapter 2. We'll go into problems B. And 2.3 is the first one we're going to cover. So the first one is, it says the hours worked and the hourly wages for 5 employees of the Kugel Company for the week ended June 10th follow. For each employee, compute the gross earnings and then compute the total gross earnings for all employees. So this is a simple one. It just kind of gets you in the hang of what you're doing here. So we've got the hours worked here. We've got the hourly wage here. And you can see that nobody's working over 40 hours here. So all we're going to do is we're going to take, and you can do this in a calculator or you can use Excel formula. I'm going to use an Excel formula here where we're going to take the hours worked times our weekly hourly wage, and that's going to be our gross earnings for our employees. So we're going to do that for each one of these. And it's just our hours times the wage for each of these guys here, because like I said, they've got no overtime here, nothing you have to worry about except just hours times the wage. And then if you add those up, you can do a sum total here in Excel and add up all of those gross earnings. So for your B answer, you're going to just add up your gross earnings here for all of the employees to come up to the total gross earnings for everyone. So pretty simple, right? Okay, that's the first one you have to go through. So let's look at the second one. Second one is 4. So let's slip over here to 4. Same thing, except this time now, you can see here we've got some employees that have worked some overtime. So let's take a look at how we calculate our overtime. We've got our hours worked here and a regular hourly wage rate. So to figure our regular earnings, we're only going to take 40 hours of the hours that were worked, because anything over that is going to be overtime pay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 40 hours times the employee's regular wage. And for each of these, we're going to take 40, because only 40 hours of that is left. 40 times the hourly wage. And this is the regular hourly wage because they're getting paid regular time for those 40 hours. Okay, so you can see here, hold on one second, sorry about that. You can see here that the regular earnings for each employee is shown there. And that's just based off of the 40 hours. Excuse me. That's just based off of the 40 hours that the employees worked. So then we need to come up with the overtime rate. And the overtime rate is time and a half from the regular hourly wage. So the way you calculate that is you take our regular hourly wage times 1.5, which will give you the time and a half. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this down, this formula, because it's just a quick way of doing it. So we just take the hourly wage times 1.5. So that'll give you now the overtime rate. Now we need to look at any hours over 40 hours are going to be considered against this overtime earnings. So you can look at the first one and we can see that there's 3 hours of overtime here, and we're going to multiply that by the overtime rate. 2 hours in this case times the overtime rate, 7 hours times the overtime rate, 1.5 hours, and I'm just taking anything that's over 40 hours is considered overtime. So 5 hours, and then we're multiplying that by the overtime rate that we calculated. Now your total gross earnings are going to be your regular earnings plus the overtime earnings. So that's how we calculate that. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste here. So I think you guys will have a okay handle on this here. It's just calculating the regular and overtime hours. So I think you should be fine in calculating these. The last one I want to spend a little bit of time on, just because it's a little bit confusing, because we're looking at fractions of hours. So when we take a look at 10, problem 10 is what we're looking at. It says, under the decimal system of computing time worked at Carmen's company, production workers who are tardy are docked according to the schedule shown below. So if they're late by 1 through 6 minutes, they're docked 1/10 of an hour. 7 through 12, 2/10 of an hour, etc. It says the regular hours of work Monday through Friday are from 7:30 to 11:30 a.m. and then from 12:30 to 4:30. In 1 week, Bernard Hoskins, who's an employee, earns $12.95 an hour, reports in and checks out as shown. Employees are not paid for ringing in a few minutes before 7:30 and 12:30, nor for ringing out a few minutes after 11:30 and 4:30. So if they're a couple minutes, if they have a couple extra minutes, either clocking in or clocking out, those are not counted. But if they're late clocking in, or if they're clocking out early, then they are docked according to the schedule that's here. So let's take a look at the schedule. And, let me look at, I'm going to try to, this is going to be hard to see. I'm just going to try to shrink it down here so we can look at both at the same time. Okay, so I think the best way to do this when we look at these are to do each period of time, do the morning and the afternoon separately. So the way I was thinking it would be the best way for you guys to calculate this. If we look at when they clocked in at 7:28, so they clocked in a little bit early, clocked out a little bit late, but in the terms of the way the company works, they clocked in at 7:30 because they don't count any of that information. And they clocked out at 11:30 because they don't count anything that's a little bit before or a little bit after. So let's look at the 7:30 to 11:30 for the morning. Let's just work on the morning time for right now. Okay, so then the next one, they clocked in late. So they clocked in 5 minutes late here because they clocked in at 7:35. So if we look up here, they're going to be docked 1/10 of an hour for the time that they were late. So what we want to do is we want to subtract 1/10 of an hour from the hours that they were there. So we'll go ahead and say, we'll say this is 7:35 and then 11:30. But we're going to show this time as only 3 hours and 9/10 instead of 4 hours. Up here we had 4 hours because they worked the regular time. But because they were docked 1/10 of an hour, they only worked 3 hours and 9/10. Okay? I know this is kind of confusing, but that's why I wanted to go through it. Okay, for the next one, they clocked in at 7:44 and 7:44 and they clocked out at 11:33. So since they clocked at 11:33, we're going to say they clocked at 11:30 because they don't count that extra. But they did clock in 14 minutes late. So if you look back here at our schedule, they're going to be docked 3/10 of an hour off of their pay. So they're going to only have 3 hours and 7/10 pay for that time. Okay, and then 7:27, they're a little bit early, so we're going to say 7:30, a little bit late to 11:30. So this is a full 4 hours on that one. And then the last one, they clocked in 4 minutes late, so they clocked in at 7:34 and then out at 11:30 because we're not going to count those extra 2 minutes. So since they were 4 minutes late, we're going to dock them 1/10 again. So this is going to be 3 and 9/10. Okay, so that's the morning time. So let's move over here, and I'll just say over here, this is AM. And let's come over here to PM. And so PM wise, we're going to do the same thing. So if they clocked in before 12:30, we're going to consider that 12:30. If they clocked in after 4:30, we'll consider that 4:30. But in this case, they clocked in at 12:50, which is 20 minutes late. So they're going to be docked, according to the schedule, 4/10 of an hour. So their hour, let's see, they are 12:50 and 12:30. Sorry, 4:30. So we're going to dock them 4/10 of an hour. So they're going to only actually work 3 hours and 6/10 of a minute, or of an hour, 6/10 of an hour. Okay, the next one, it's 12:30 to 4:30. So this is a standard 4-hour day for them, or 4-hour section for them. On Wednesday, they clocked in at 12:27, so we're going to consider that 12:30, and then they, and then they clocked out at 4:30. So that's another standard 4 hours. Okay, so for the next one, here on Thursday, they clocked in 2 minutes late at 12:32, and then they clocked out at 4:32, so we're going to consider that 4:30. So they were 2 minutes late. So 2 minutes late, we're going to deduct 1/10 of an hour. So we have 3 hours and 9/10 of an hour. And then on Friday, they clocked in at 12:40, so they were 10 minutes late and then out at 4:30. So 10 minutes late, according to the schedule, is 2/10 of an hour. So this is going to be 3 and 8/10 left. Those are the hours that they worked if you take out the deduction. So let's add these together now to come up with our schedule of what we are going to pay our employee. So if we take our 4 and 3 and 6/10, that means we're going to have 7 full hours and then 6/10 of a fraction. And the next one is we've got 3 and 9/10 and 4 here. So I'm going to quickly just highlight these areas here so you can see the hours a lot easier. So we've got 3 and 9/10 and 4. So we've got 7 and 9/10 hours for that employee. 3 and 7/10 and 4. 7 and 7/10. And then the next one we've got 4 and 3 and 9/10. So we've got 7 and 9/10 hours. And then we have 3 and 9/10 and 3 and 8/10. So we actually have, well, since we have a lot, this would actually be 6 and 17/10. So we're going to take that. You can't have 17/10. So if you have 17/10, we're going to add 1 to our 7 because you have 10/10. You take 10/10 out of that. This is now going back to fractions. So I hope you guys remember how this works. If we take 10/10 out of that, that makes another 1. So we're going to add that to our whole number. So we're going to have 7 hours, and then we're going to have 7/10 left over. So we're going to say 7 here and then 7/10 left over. Okay, now add everything up here, and you're going to see we've got 6/10, 9/10, 7/10, 9/10, and 7/10. We have 38/10 here total. And just like I said, if we have more than 10/10, we can't have a fraction here. So we've got to take some of those pieces out. So we know that we can take 10/10 out 3 different times out of that, and each 10/10 is going to be 1. So we've got, I know this is confusing, and I'm probably not explaining this math-wise well, but when you have 38/10, you've got 1 10/10, and then you've got another 10/10, you've got another 10/10, and then you've got 8/10. So this would equal 38/10. But we know that 10/10, this is equal to 1. Equal to 1 here, right? So each one of these is equal to 1, and then we're left with our 8/10. So what we want to do is we're going to add in 3 hours to our full hours, and then we're going to be left with 8/10. So we've got right here with our 7s, we've got 35 hours total. So since we have 35 and 38/10 hours, now we know down here we're going to take out those 10/10, so we're going to end up with 38 full hours, and then we're going to end up with our 8/10 left over. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so now to calculate our gross earnings for the week, we're going to take 38 and 8/10 times the hourly wage that was given in the problem of $12.95. So the way we're going to figure that is we're going to take 38.8, that's 8/10, and then we'll multiply that by $12.95, and that will give us our weekly earnings for that employee. Okay, that's all I have for this week, and please read through your text, go over the examples of how this works, and if you have questions, please let me know. I'm here to answer those questions for you. And I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week. Or actually, I'll see you on Wednesday for our open office hours as well. Thanks so much and have a good day.